The value of a human life is one of those questions that are considered too taboo to even ask, let alone answer. But us economists aren't a particularly beloved bunch, and usually it's the subjects that people least want to talk about that are often the most interesting. Hence, I'll use similar considerations to what I'd use when assessing the value of a business to answer this question. Putting aside the ethical considerations for a moment, you could calculate it in a number of ways. Firstly, there's that of the base elements, meaning that monetary value that you would get if you were to somehow separate someone to their base atomic components and then add it all up together. It's about $1 for everything minus your skin, and around $3.50 for your tanned hide, which we'll somewhat dodgily attempt to sell as cowhide. Under this assessment model, you're barely worth as much as an overpriced cup of coffee, at around $4.50 as of 2010. Secondly is the organs and other genetic information. Depending on whom you ask, you could be looking at anywhere from $10,000 to a couple million. Organ selling is not a particularly unified market, and there's various degrees of legality throughout the world. Furthermore, if you're a truly desperate millionaire with a failing kidney, you wouldn't think twice about tossing out a couple $100,000 for a compatible kidney. But I'll use the $10,000 to $100,000 range provided by the Detroit Free Press, as it seems to be the most reasonable source that uses actual court information and doesn't seem to be hyperbole and clickbait like others. Thirdly, there's the monetary value derived from their work. Here's where it starts getting tricky. Whereas before we could reasonably calculate the value of something based on the utility it provides, here it's extremely subjective. Unlike purchasing a liver from the black market or the base elements of a human body, where there's ample potential supply if the prices are good enough, in this category there are items of incalculable value because of their perceived uniqueness. How much do you sell the Mona Lisa for example? Even if you make a copy, in that it's identical atom by atom, the copy wouldn't sell even remotely close to the original. There's no substitute commodity for it, and the only point of reference is itself. Not because Renaissance paintings of women are so rare, but because it's the Mona Lisa. Basic things like insuring it are a nightmare. In 1962, it was valued at an insurance payoff of a maximum of around $790 million when adjusted for inflation. But the security necessary for its safe transportation exceeded the maximum premium payoff. Should these costs not be factored into the valuation? After all, it's safekeeping and conservation or value added to the end product. But then, if you follow this logic, its value spins out of control as it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle that approaches infinity, despite there never actually being anything extra added to it. Incidentally, Lorenzo the Magnificent said that from 1434 to 1471, the Medici spent 600,000 florins for public purposes, and the expenditure, quote, casts a brilliant light upon our condition on the city, unquote. If we take this 37-year time frame to be representative of the Medici willingness to be patrons, and we guesstimate that the Italian Renaissance lasted 200 years from 1300 to 1500, they would have spent a total of 3,243,243 florins, or around 468.399 million, meaning that the Mona Lisa's lowball insurance payoff is worth almost twice as much as the entire Renaissance from the Medici's perspective, which is frankly ridiculous. We don't add an infinite number of dollars to the GDP every time someone is born. That would be silly and patently unhelpful. We usually subconsciously draw a distinction between real value and feel-good value, or at the very least our laws imply as much, given that as a society we're fine with some deaths for the sake of convenience. Automobiles are allowed on the streets despite that there are accidents, for instance. If we generally believe that whosoever saves a life is considered as if he saved an entire world, as the oft-quoted phrase from the Talmud says, we wouldn't be allowed to drive cars at all. Instead, as a society, we've reached a compromise. In areas where there are speed limits, we've agreed that no matter what the person stands to gain from going fast to their destination, society stands to lose far more from their risky behavior. However, we also implicitly know that there will be casualties, even if everyone respects the speed limits. Hence, we are willing to tolerate a certain cost of life to satisfy our individual desires. It might change from day to day, from legal jurisdiction to legal jurisdiction, or even based on the time of day. But there is an implied monetary value hidden away in our practices, which we unconsciously and collectively apply to human life. A potential future Da Vinci might be run over, but we accept this as a reasonable cost for our convenience. The unconscious mechanisms that drive our society have thus arrived at a monetary value for life, and it is far from an infinitely high one at that, but neither is it anywhere near the $4.50 number. Hence, the middle ground of around 10,000 to 100,000 might be more appropriate and closer to the monetary value we apply to a life. Neither is it disregarding the value of the shape that the components are in, nor is it blowing it out of proportion by assigning freakishly large value to it. Same logic ought to apply to stock valuations. One should not be so pessimistic as to only consider the scrap metal of the machinery of the company, but neither should we believe that the ideas behind it can perform miracles.